Our tale from Trench Crusade today takes us to a ruined chapel in no man's land, where new Antioch's signalmen crouched beneath broken saints and listened through the buried bones of the earth. There, in a listening post named Enoch, a field telephone began to carry a hymn that no living throat had sung. My name was Corporal Ivo Marek of the new Antioch Signals Corps, 2nd Forward Wire Company, attached that winter to the 7th Penitent Line outside the old market town of Vare. I say my name was, not because I am dead, but because names change their weight after certain sounds have passed through them. Before Enoch, Ivo Marek meant a practical man with a knife for scraping insulation, a pocket notebook of line faults, and enough patience to sit 8 hours beside a switchboard while officers shouted through mud and copper. After Enoch, it meant the man they turned toward when the ward lamps were low and the other deaf men began to hum. Signals work was not glamorous. Infantrymen thought we carried messages. Artillerymen thought we delayed them. Staff officers thought we were furniture that could be cursed into usefulness. The truth sat somewhere between wire, water, and fear. A signal line was a vein laid through a battlefield that wanted everything dead. Shells cut it. Rats chewed it. Frost split the gutta percha. Burial parties drove picks through it in the dark. Men stumbled over it, cursed it, and then begged God for it when the bombardment came down and the runners did not return. I had learned the trade from an old Maronite sergeant who could hear a fault in a line the way a priest hears a false confession. He taught me to put the receiver hard against the bone below the ear, close one eye, and listen past the obvious. A clean break had a flat deadness. A flooded junction breathed. A bad earth buzzed like an angry fly. Crossed lines produced ghosts of other conversations. A battery captain reciting map squares over a supply clerk asking for lamp oil. A chaplain giving absolution beneath a company cook complaining about salt. None of it was magic. That was what I believed then. The world was full of mysteries only because men were lazy about causes. Listening. Post Enoch lay 80 yards beyond our forward trench, under the remains of St. Barachiel's chapel. The chapel itself was less a building than an accusation. One wall still stood, blackened by fire, with a half-arch clinging to it like a broken rib. The roof had fallen 2 years before. The bell had been stolen by heretic raiders and later found in a crater, split down the side and packed with teeth. Our engineers had dug beneath the nave, down through charred flagstones and old burial vaults, and made a chamber where 6 men could work if none objected to the knees of the dead. We called it Enoch because the first officer assigned to it had been pious, and because all listening posts needed names gentler than what they were. Enoch was a cellar with a roof of beams, sandbags, coffin planks, and chapel stone. Its entrance ran through a communication crawl from our sap, low enough that a man had to go on elbows for the final 12 yards. Inside, the air smelled of wax, damp lime, old bones, lamp smoke, and the coppery tang of too many hands on wire. Against the east wall stood our switchboard, 4 rows of brass jacks, cloth-bound cords, numbered drops, and little hinged shutters that fell when a call came in. Beside it sat the recorder table with 2 wax cylinder machines and a box of blanks wrapped in oiled cloth. Ground microphones came in through ceramic glands and ended at a listening bench where headsets hung from pegs like captured ears. Field telephone lines ran from Enoch to battalion, to the forward companies, to the artillery correction pit, and to 3 buried microphones we had pushed under no man's land by night. There were also ossuary wires, as we called them, because they passed through the chapel crypt and had been tied along the old bone racks where monks had stacked parish dead long before the war. The ossuary wires worked better than they had any right to. Bone held dryness when earth held water. The old skull shelves made good supports. That was my explanation, and I defended it with all the stubbornness of a man who preferred carpentry to theology. There were 5 of us assigned to Enoch when the trouble began. Sergeant Thomas Arendt commanded the post. He was a broad, neat man from the mountain batteries with a gray beard trimmed square under his chin and a habit of polishing his spectacles even when he could not see for smoke. Thomas believed in order as other men believed in angels. His logbook entries were beautiful. Time, source, condition, content, action taken. He could turn panic into columns. If a shell had landed on his boots, he would have written the hour before jumping. Private Nico Salan was our youngest operator, 17 by his own claim and 15 by his cheeks. He had quick fingers, a quicker mouth, and a musician's cursed memory. He could hear a tune once and whistle it 3 days later while relacing boots. Before the war, he had helped his mother tune church bells near Ragusa. This made him useful with sound and unbearable at rest. He tapped constantly, on tins, on rifle stocks, on his own teeth when his hands were full. Brother operator Severin Crail belonged to the Order of St. Hiram, those engineer pilgrims who believed the Lord loved a clean circuit. Severin wore a patched brown habit under his signal coat and kept a little shrine above the battery rack, brass crucifix, 3 candle stubs, St. Hiram's pliers, a fragment of blue glass said to be from a church window in Antioch. He could solder in darkness by smell. He spoke seldom, but when he did, it was usually either scripture or an exact measurement. Marta Vane was not formally signals. She was an artillery sound-ranging clerk detached to us because she could take shorthand faster than most men could think. Her left eye had gone milky after a gas shell on the Habsburg front, but the right one missed nothing. She had a laugh as dry as cartridge paper and no patience for men who confused volume with authority. She kept the wax cylinder logs, transcribed intercepted noise, and sharpened pencils with a trench knife that had probably killed someone. Father Odrin Keel visited us twice a day from the forward aid shrine, more often when shelling allowed. He was a thin priest with red hands and a voice softened by exhaustion. He had been a parish curate before the war, then a stretcher-bearer, then a confessor to men who went over the parapet with relics sewn into their collars. He blessed the batteries, the wires, the headsets, and our ears. I accepted this the way I accepted oil on metal. It did no harm, and some men worked better after it. Our duty was to listen. That sounds simple to those who have never done it. It was not. The battlefield was never silent. Even quiet had layers. Rain ticking on wire, water dripping into sumps, distant pumps, rats, timber settling, boots in trenches, shells passing high like wagons over a bridge, the slow grind of enemy mining augers, men coughing underground, spades, wheels, the click of a safety catch magnified by earth. Our ground microphones heard through mud, chalk, masonry, and graves. We learned to sort the living from the mechanical, the near from the far, the harmless from the shape of death. A good listening post saved lives because it heard preparation before action. We heard heretic sappers once and had a countermine ready before their charge was tamped. We heard a column of light guns being dragged along a sunken road and gave the coordinates to our batteries. We heard chanting, too, now and then, carried by air or wire or imagination from the enemy side. The heretic legions loved noise. Drums made from skin, horns carved from femurs, hymns that had no mercy in them. But noise was noise. If you could mark its source, strength, direction, and change over time, then you could make use of it. That was the sin by which I entered the matter. I heard hell singing through our wires and tried to make it useful. The first call came on the 3rd night of sleet after Epiphany. I remember the date because Tomas had drawn a ruler line across the logbook page at midnight and written, in his fine hand, low visibility, ground hardening, enemy quiet. He underlined quiet once. That was our first mistake, though not his. Quiet on that front never meant absence. It meant listening had become mutual. I was on the switchboard with Nico beside me at the microphone bench. Severin knelt by the battery rack, changing a weak cell. Marta was at the recorder table, wrapping a filled cylinder. Thomas stood behind us with one hand tucked into his belt, reading the last report from battalion by lantern light. At 0117, drop 7 fell. Drop 7 was a deadline. It had once connected to Forward Observation Pit Larch, a miserable hole in a shell-split orchard. Larch had taken a direct hit 2 weeks before. We had recovered 2 men, part of a rangefinder, and enough wire to prove the line was cut in 3 places. I had not yet removed the label because labels lasted longer than posts at the front. The jack remained on the board, unconnected beyond a stump somewhere under frozen mud. The little shutter clicked down with a dry, polite sound. Nico looked at me. I looked at the shutter. "Wind," he said, though wind did not move brass drops in underground rooms. I plugged in. "Enoch receiving. Identify." There was only static at first. Not ordinary static. Ordinary line noise scratches, spits, and flattens. This came in pulses, faint but even, as if someone were brushing a sleeve over the mouthpiece in time with a march. 3 short, 1 long. 3 short, 1 long. Beneath it lay a tone so low I felt it in my molars before I heard it. I tapped the board. "Possible induction on 7. Thomas stepped closer. "From what?" "That is the question, Sergeant." I switched the receiver to the second headset and handed it to him. His face changed by no more than a tightening at the eyes. "Record it," he said. Marta set a fresh wax cylinder, wound the machine, and lowered the stylus. The little horn trembled as the line fed through. Static, pulse, tone. Severin rose from the batteries and made the sign of the cross with 2 fingers, not theatrically, simply because his hand had decided before his mind had finished. Then the voice entered. It was far away and close inside the skull. Not loud. Loudness would have been easier. This was thin, intimate, and patient. A single note became 2, then a chord impossible for one throat, then a melody moving under the static in steps so small they felt like pressure changes. I could not make out words. I could only tell that the sound wished to be understood. Nico stopped tapping. Marta's pencil hovered. Thomas said, "Is that singing?" "No," I said too quickly. "It is a harmonic. Crosstalk, perhaps. Something from their side riding the ground." Severin looked at the dead label. "On a severed line." "Severed lines still have length. Length receives." I said it as if reciting from a manual, because manuals have a way of keeping fear at arm's reach. The melody rose, bent, and fell. In its fall I heard a shape like syllables, not language I knew, not Latin, Church Slavonic, Arabic, German, or the gutter tongues picked up between trenches. It made my attention lean toward it. That was the first danger. It did not seize the mind. It invited the mind to complete what it lacked. Marta whispered, "It repeats." She was right. After perhaps 40 seconds, the same phrase returned, though not exactly. The second time, a faint tapping accompanied it. 3 short, 1 long. 3 short, 1 long. Nico's fingers began moving on his trouser seam before he noticed. When he did, he tucked both hands under his armpits and glared at them like disobedient dogs. Thomas ordered me to trace the board. I checked the jack, the cord, the binding posts, the earth return, the lightning arrestor. Nothing loose. Severin tested the cell. Good. I lifted the 7 line off its terminal, and the singing stopped. "There," I said, relieved beyond reason. "External pickup. Not in the board." Then the telephone on the shelf rang. It was not connected to anything. We kept it for parts, an old field set with a cracked Bakelite mouthpiece and no line leads. Its magnetobell gave 3 sharp rings, paused, and gave 1 long, shuddering ring that made the hammer stick against the cup. No one moved. The bell rang again. 3 short, 1 long. Father Odran would later tell me that evil often imitates procedure because men are trained to obey procedure before conscience. At the time, I did what any signal corporal does when a telephone rings. I lifted the receiver. The dead set smelled of dust and old spit. There should have been nothing in it. No circuit, no battery, no path. Yet against my ear came that same low note, now clearer, and behind it a sound like many men breathing through broken teeth. A voice sang 1 word. Larch. The word was not spoken as we would speak it. It was fitted into the hymn, stretched across notes, but it was our word. Our dead observation pit, our label on the board, our loss. I dropped the receiver. It struck the shelf, swung by its cord, and knocked against the wood in the rhythm. 3 short, 1 long. Thomas ended the recording, sealed the cylinder, and wrote the event without flourish. 0117. Drop 7 activated. Unidentified vocal transmission. Dead auxiliary set rang. Word larch, heard by CPL Marek, line isolated. He did not write that his hand shook. I saw the ink thicken where his pen paused. We sent a report to battalion over line 2. Battalion replied after 10 minutes. Maintain watch. Record all. Do not abandon post. Signals intelligence possible. That was command in a single phrase. Intelligence possible. The 2 words by which a man may be persuaded to lean closer to a grave. At 0203, while we argued over whether to wake Father Odran, Drop 7 fell again, though its wire remained lifted from the terminal. This time no one touched the board. The shutter hung open like a small black mouth. The wax cylinder machine began to turn by itself. Marta swore and snatched her hand back. The crank rotated twice, slowly, without spring tension. The stylus lowered onto a blank cylinder she had not yet fixed in place. Wax hissed beneath the needle. From the horn came my own voice, recorded in a thin, mechanical ghost. Enoch receiving. Identify. Then the hymn answered in perfect time. Father Odran came through the crawl at 0229 with mud on his elbows and a stole stuffed inside his tunic. He listened to Tomas's report without interruption. That was one of the reasons men trusted him. He did not rush to call every fear a demon, nor every demon a fear. Play the cylinder, Tomas said. Marta said it with 2 fingers as if it were hot. The first cylinder gave us static, the pulsed rhythm, the far melody, and then the moment where the dead field set rang. My own question was not on that cylinder because I had spoken into the telephone after Marta stopped recording. Yet the second cylinder, the one that had turned by itself, held my words clearly. Enoch receiving. Identify. The answer followed. Not larch this time. We heard a line of harsh syllables, then 3 words in bad but intelligible army French, the common tongue of our sector. Guns sleep west. The room took that in slowly. Tomas made Marta play it again. The hymn moved under the words like a river under ice. Guns sleep west. Nico made a little sound, almost a laugh. That is nonsense. Perhaps, Tomas said. CPL Marek. I wanted the thing to be only terror, because terror has simple instructions. Instead, I thought of the Western Ridge, where our observers had suspected a heretic battery for 3 days but seen no muzzle flashes. It may refer to dormant artillery, I said. West of their forward trench. Could be nothing. Could be a battery waiting. Father Odran looked at me, and I disliked the pity in his face. And if it is bait? All signals may be bait, Father. That is not an answer. It is the only honest one. Tomas sent the phrase to battalion marked, Unconfirmed Intercept. Brigade acted. By dawn, our heavies had put 36 shells across the western ridge. As the sleet thinned to gray rain, a secondary explosion lifted black smoke over the enemy rear. Observers later counted at least 4 destroyed gun pits, perhaps 6. By noon, the mood in Enoch had changed. Men can become accustomed to horror if horror proves useful. That is one of the war's lessons, and perhaps the most damning. A corpse in a trench is an outrage on the first day. By the 3rd, it is cover. By the 5th, it is a landmark. We did not cease to fear the hymn, but our fear acquired a ledger. It had told us something true. Because it had been true, we listened for the next truth. Command sent down instructions wrapped in caution and hunger. Continue collection. Attempt source bearing. Do not engage verbally beyond identification. Preserve cylinders. Chaplain oversight recommended, but not to impede operational use. Not to impede. Father Odran read those words twice and folded the message carefully. "This is how men write permission for damnation," he said. Tomas removed his spectacles and cleaned them. "With respect, Father, those guns would have killed our infantry." "I know. And if more warnings come?" "I know that too." That was the misery of it. No one in Enoch wanted to serve hell. We wanted men in our line to live until breakfast. The hymn offered grace with a hook inside it. For 3 days it helped us. It came irregularly, always through impossible routes. A disconnected drop, a buried microphone with its switch open, the spare telephone shut inside a tool chest. A coordinate in a child's voice exposed an assembly trench. The Latin aqua nigra sub pede sent engineers to poisoned black water under a forward sap. Outside the chapel wall, the wire tightened in my hands and the hymn breathed one word into an unconnected headset. "Down!" I dragged Nico flat. A rifle grenade burst where our heads had been. I told him I had felt the wire shift. That was true. It was not the whole truth. The report went in. Command's appetite sharpened. A major from Brigade Signals came down in a clean coat and did not stay long enough for his boots to learn the mud. He praised Thomas's discipline, inspected the cylinders as if they were clever machinery, and ordered a dedicated collection schedule. 1 operator on dead 7, 1 on ground microphones, 1 recording, 1 resting, 1 free for line repair. Father Odran objected. The major smiled as if humoring a child. "Father, if the enemy uses corrupted chant to pass orders, then refusing to listen is negligence. This is not the enemy passing orders." "Then what is it?" Father Odran looked at our board, our wax, our wires disappearing through bones. "Something that has noticed you have made yourselves into ears." The major's smile thinned. "The war will be won by men who make use of unpleasant things. It may also be lost by them." After he left, Tomas posted the new schedule. He did not ask our opinions. He had orders, and orders were beams in his mind. Without them, the roof might come down. I busied myself with improvements. I rewired 7 through an isolation coil, added a knife switch to cut the line to earth, braided a fresh ground into the chapel foundation, weighted the spare telephone's chest, and filed for batteries, wax, better headphones, and a galvanometer sensitive enough to measure the pulse. Each alteration made the post safer in my language and more hospitable in Father Odran's. "You are building it a better road," he said. "I am building us a safer gate. Gates are for things that belong on the other side." I tightened a binding screw. "Father, with respect, if it can ring a disconnected set, it does not need my road." "Perhaps not, but it likes your hospitality." I wanted to resent him. Instead, I found myself angry because he had named what I already feared. The hymn did not break in. It arrived by means we understood and improved them through our attention. Every test taught it our instruments. Every warning made us more willing to sit with it. On the 4th night, the hymn used Thomas's name. It happened during a routine logging period. Lamp smoke, damp wool, Thomas correcting Nico's handwriting in the margin. Drop 7 fell at 23:48. Marta started the recorder. I plugged through the isolation coil, left one hand on the knife switch, and said nothing. Static came first. 3 short, 1 long. Beneath it, the melody unfolded, familiar enough now to frighten me more than novelty. Then the voice sang, "Tomas." The sergeant froze with his pen above the page. "Tomas Arendt, son of Mila, keeper of straight lines." No one breathed. Tomas's mother had been named Mila. He had once mentioned sending half his pay to her and his sisters in Moravia. It was not in any Enoch file, not on the board, not a thing the enemy could draw from a captured map. "Cut it," Father Odran said. He had come early that evening, uneasy without knowing why. I threw the knife switch. The line grounded with a spark. The hymn stopped in my headset, but the room did not become silent. From the wax cylinder horn, where the stylus had lifted and the machine stood still, the voice finished the phrase, "Keeper of straight lines, count now the crooked." Every drop on the switchboard fell at once. 32 little shutters snapped down. Field telephones rang, active sets, spare sets, sets without cords. Marta tore at the recorder horn. Severin lit the shrine candles and saw the flames burn downward. Tomas stood fixed over the logbook as his pen leaked a black blot. It spread against the rules of ink, formed 3 short marks and 1 long mark, then curled into a sign that made the mind look down a stair with no end. Father Odron slapped his palm over it and hissed as if burned. "Out!" he said. "All of you, out now!" Tomas found his voice. "We cannot abandon operational equipment. Sergeant, if you give me one more line from your regulations, I will drag you by the beard." That broke whatever held us. Nico crawled first, then Marta with the cylinder case, then Tomas. Severin fled after the candles. I was last because even then, idiot that I was, I thought of procedure. If we left all lines open, Enoch might feed the hymn into battalion, into artillery, into every dugout tied to our copper. I lunged back, tore the main earth strap free, and slammed down the master disconnect. The room went silent. For one heartbeat, I believed I had won. Then the wire bundle above the board flexed. It moved with a muscular ripple under its cloth wrapping. A bead gathered at a nick in the copper where I had scraped insulation that morning. It was black, not oil, not tar, cold enough that frost whitened the wire around it. It fell onto the board and did not splash. It drew itself into a thin curve, then another, then 3 small strokes and 1 long line. The hymn whispered inside my closed mouth. I fled. I will not dress it as tactical withdrawal. Behind me, in Enoch, the disconnected telephone rang once more. 3 short, 1 long. At dawn, the brigade major returned with 6 armed men, a reliquary box, and a hardened expression. The Western Ridge, assembly trench, poisoned gallery, saved repair party, all had moved upward through headquarters like water through dry mouths. Command would not relinquish Enoch because it had frightened its operators. Father Odron described the black signs. The major asked if any physical sample had been secured. Thomas described the use of his mother's name. The major asked if that had occurred before or after the actionable intelligence. Marta played the cylinder. On it, the voice sang Thomas's name, then continued after the switch cut. The major listened twice. "We are dealing," he said, "with a hostile intelligence capable of psychological mimicry." Father Odron answered, "We are dealing with a severed head that has found our wire." That was the first time he named it plainly. The heretic choristers were not rumors on our front. We had seen their work, whole men unable to rise, officers mouthing hymns they did not know, horses kneeling while drivers wept. A chorister began, chaplains taught, as a willing sacrifice on a black altar. After 9 days, the corpse rose, took the blade, and completed its own beheading. The head did not die. It sang. The song conjured hell, made despair feel wise, and loosened obedience from the soul. Its cold blood marked diabolic rhythm. Men who found such heads were ordered to stuff their ears, smash the jaw, burn the remains, and confess before sleep. That was battlefield doctrine. It did not mention switchboards. The major heard Father Odron and frowned, not in disbelief, but in convenience. "Destroy Enoch," said the priest, "not before we learn what it knows. What it knows is us." There was Odron's moral clarity, muddy and exhausted in a war that rewarded compromise. Opposite him stood Command's pragmatism, clean-coated and impossible to shame, weighing sanctity against artillery results. The major turned to Thomas. "Can the post be operated under stricter discipline?" Thomas looked old in the morning light. He should have refused. I should have refused. Instead, the sergeant asked for 2 additional men, a guard on the crawl, insulated gloves, and authority to terminate collection at his discretion. "Granted," said the major. Father Odron closed his eyes. By noon, we were back in Enoch. We changed the room as if carpentering could shame a haunting into order. Severin rehung the shrine. Father Odran chalked prayers above the entrance and fixed a small reliquary to the lintel. I relayed connections and set knife switches within reach of every operator, and Marta began a second log for anomalous phenomena, a phrase so bloodless she underlined it twice in disgust. Tomas issued rules like a man building a wall from paper. No humming, no unnecessary speech during activity, no personal names on circuit, no operator under headset more than 12 minutes. All intercepts to be repeated by writing only, anyone hearing his own name to remove headset and report, any object moving without contact to be blessed, isolated, or broken. Nico raised his hand as if in school. And if the blessed object moves, then Private Salon will have permission not to make jokes, Tomas said. It helped. For an hour, the old rhythm of work returned. Men can live under impossible rules if they are written clearly enough. At 16:10, the hymn warned of gas. 2 words came through a ground microphone whose cable I had personally disconnected and coiled on the bench. Green dawn. We sent the warning. At 1700, heretic mortars opened with gas shells along the left companies. Our men already had masks on. Casualties were light. Battalion congratulated Enoch. Each success was another nail in us. The hymn no longer sounded distant. It had gained body in the room. When it came, the air thickened as if the chamber itself were listening back. The wires along the wall vibrated in sections like ranks of a choir answering a cantor. The brass jacks chilled under the fingers. Condensation climbed upward. Wax cylinders sometimes recorded faint harmony before we had lowered the stylus. Marta discovered that last detail. She had marked a blank cylinder, set it on the table, and turned to sharpen a pencil. Before it touched the machine, a groove appeared around its surface, deepening by itself in perfect pitch. "No," she said. "Just that. Not loud." The strongest refusal I heard in Enoch. We played it because we were already lost enough to be curious. At first, the cylinder gave only soft hiss, then came a woman's voice singing. Marta dropped her pencil. It was her voice, not smoke rough and clipped as it was then, but younger and full, perhaps from before the gas took her eye. It sang the hymn accurately, without strain, as if she had known it all her life. "I have never sung that," she said. No one answered. Under Marta's impossible singing came the scratch of pencil on paper. On the next blank page of her logbook, words appeared in Marta's shorthand. Her own system, tight black hooks and cuts. She snatched the book away and read with her face emptying. "What does it say?" I asked. She closed the book. "It says my sister's name." Father Odran ordered the cylinder smashed. The brigade major ordered it preserved. Tomas hesitated between priest and command. Marta settled it. She took the cylinder outside, put it under her boot, and ground it into the mud until wax filled the tread. The major threatened charges. Marta told him to file them with whichever office kept records for damned phonographs. That night, Enoch changed shape. I do not mean the walls moved in any way an engineer's measure could prove. The beams remained where they were. The board stayed against the east wall, yet every time I looked up, the room seemed longer. The switchboard, with its rows of jacks, began to resemble carved choir stalls I had seen in old churches, ranks of dark openings waiting for faces. The hanging headsets looked like folded hoods. The skulls behind the cables faced inward. I had worked beside those bones for weeks without minding them. Now each empty socket seemed positioned toward the listening bench. Nico whispered, "They are the congregation." "Shut your mouth," I said. "I did not mean to say it." Severin took refuge in measurements. The board was below freezing while the entrance remained warm. Seven showed infinite resistance except during vocal events. The black fluid froze glass on contact. The inverted candle burn was finite. Blessed wax in the ears dulled the hymn but did not defeat it. The low note entered through jaw, skull, and sternum. "Tooth conduction," Severin wrote, and underlined it 3 times. The black fluid returned at 0240, bleeding from copper in little beads, gathering into marks before evaporating. Father Odran said they were not letters, but measures, diabolic notation, a score for obedience. Severin copied one before the priest could stop him and spent the next hour with his hands plunged in icy water because the copied sign crawled across his palm in raised black veins. We should have burned the post then. Even command's hunger might have yielded to that. But at 03:15, the hymn gave us the hour and axis of an assault planned for dawn. It named the regiments. It described the smoke. It told us where the mine would open. It gave 3 map squares and the phrase "under bells." Tomas sent it. Brigade verified movement by flare and aerial report. Artillery shifted. Reserves stood to. Engineers found the mine chamber under the old bell crater and flooded it with burning oil. At dawn, when the heretic assault came, it broke against prepared guns. Hundreds died in the wire. Our line held. Men cheered Enoch over the telephone. We sat underground in a room that had become choir stalls, with skulls for its congregation and black signs drying on the board, and heard living soldiers bless the thing that had begun to eat us. Enoch saved the line while it was being consumed. After the failed assault, command called us vital. Vital is a word that makes men expendable with ceremony. 2 more operators were sent down, but neither lasted an hour. One began weeping blood from the left eye after hearing his dead wife ask for thread. The other tried to bite through a telephone cord because he believed a tongue was growing inside it. They were removed, and the original 5 remained because we were already tuned. That was Marta's word. Tuned. "We're not infected," Nico insisted. His fingers tapped on his knees, 3 short, 1 long. "We are tired." Marta caught his wrist. "Then be tired in another rhythm." He tried. God help him, he tried. He tapped 2 short, 2 long. He tapped a marching beat. He tapped the pattern for line clear, line busy, repeat last. Within a minute, his hand returned to the hymn's measure as water returns downhill. Tomas stopped sleeping. He sat with the logbooks open, ruling lines, numbering events, correcting spellings no one else could see. Once I found him writing future times in the margin. 0412, 0413, 0414. He had filled 3 pages with minutes not yet lived. When I asked what he was doing, he blinked and said, "Maintaining continuity." Severin grew gentle, which frightened me more than panic would have. He spoke to the wires while he worked, apologizing when he cut insulation, murmuring prayers not to God but near the copper. I heard him say, "Not yet," to a terminal screw. When I challenged him, he looked embarrassed. "It pulls less if one asks," he said. Father Odrin argued hourly with the major. Their voices came down the crawl in fragments. "Operational necessity. Spiritual contagion. You would sacrifice the line for superstition. You have already sacrificed the post for intelligence." I kept working. There was always another practical matter to stand between me and recognition. Condensation on contacts, battery drain, recorder speed fluctuation, a buzzing earth return. Each fault could be named. Each named fault suggested a remedy. If the room was becoming a throat, then I would locate the larynx. If the hymn traveled by copper, I would interrupt copper. If it used ground, I would change ground. If it used bone, I would cut away bone. At my request, engineers brought in a small charge to collapse the ossuary recess if ordered. The major approved it only because I described it as anti-induction shielding. Father Odrin knew I lied and said nothing. We packed the charge behind the bone shelves where the 7 stump entered through masonry. I ran the firing leads to the switchboard and marked them with red cloth. The hymn watched us prepare. I cannot prove that sentence in any court of men. Sound has no eyes, but attention can be felt. Every time I stripped a wire, the melody altered. Every time Father Odrin prayed over the charge, the static thickened. When Marta touched the firing plunger to test its spring, all the telephones in Enoch rang once, softly, like laughter behind a hand. At 2100, Father Odrin told us what he had learned from captured accounts and chaplain reports. Somewhere opposite our sector, perhaps in a crypt, perhaps in a gun pit, The heretics must have enthroned a chorister head near a line junction or buried cable, not placed by accident, offered to the communications earth deliberately. The thing's severed blood would mark rhythm. Its song would weaken men in earshot, yes, but through our wires it had found a greater reach. A normal chorister sang to those before it. This one sang into a network. "Why give us true warnings?" Thomas asked. "To keep you listening," said the priest. "But the assault failed because of it." Father Odran's face was gray. Perhaps that assault was not the offering they cared about. No one spoke for a while. Nico broke the silence. "What does it want, then?" The answer came from the switchboard, not through a headset, not from the horn, from the board itself, from brass and wood and cold black moisture in the seams. "To be answered." The voice was ours. It spoke in 5 voices at once. Thomas's careful baritone, Marta's dry alto, Nico's bell-clear youth, Severin's low monastic murmur, and my own practical rasp. The blend formed a chord that made my knees loosen. Father Odran raised his crucifix. The brass darkened in his hand. The board spoke again. "You listen. You write. You send. You answer." The drops began to fall in sequence, not randomly. Line 2 to battalion, line 3 to artillery, line 4 to reserve aid, line 5 to engineers. Each shutter clicked down in the hymn's rhythm. The chords on the board lifted from their hooks, swaying like snakes seeking holes. I grabbed the master disconnect. It would not move. Frost sealed the lever. Severin came beside me with pliers. Together we forced it down. The switch cracked, but the board continued to speak. "Enoch receiving," it said in my voice. "Identify." Then, from far away, a second voice answered. A voice with no lungs. The hymn opened fully. All previous transmissions had been glimpses through a keyhole. This was the door unbarred. Sound filled the chamber without becoming loud. It was in the jaw, the spine, the soft places behind the eyes. It carried images, not seen, but remembered as if from a life we had lived before birth. Black altars slick beneath 9-day moons. Men kneeling willingly while knives passed from hand to hand. Corpses rising with serene obedience. A body completing its own beheading while the head smiled. Cold blood running across stone in measures. A choir of severed mouths hung from iron hooks, each singing a different grief until grief became architecture. Nico screamed. The scream joined the chord and became harmony. Marta drove her pencil into her own thigh to remain present. Thomas recited log procedure aloud like a litany. Severin began the psalm of deliverance, but the meter bent under him, dragging each line toward the hymn. Father Odran shouted the prayer against apostate song and struck the switchboard with his crucifix. The wood split. Black fluid welled from the crack, steaming cold. The cords plugged themselves in. I saw one cloth-bound plug lift, search, and slide into line 2. Another entered artillery. Another found the reserve aid line. If the hymn reached those circuits, it would no longer be Enoch alone. It would move through command wires, field exchanges, telephones and dugouts where exhausted men waited beside lamps. It would enter every ear trained to obey a ring. That was when practical sense returned, not as denial, but as duty. A fault had to be isolated. I seized the axe kept for emergency timber work and chopped into the cord bank. Brass sparked, cloth smoked. The hymn faltered, but did not stop. Marta, seeing me, dragged herself to the recorder table and smashed the machines one by one. Wax cylinders burst under her boot, releasing little gasps of stored song. Thomas pulled plugs barehanded until black frost climbed his fingers. Severin took the battery rack apart with a wrench, hurling cells against the wall so acid ran over the floor. Father Odran crawled to the ossuary charge plunger. The board spoke in his mother's voice. "Odran, leave them. They have already answered." He flinched. The plunger remained under his hand. "Father!" I shouted. He looked at me through the storm of sound, and I understood then that even priests are sons before they are soldiers. Whatever he heard, it had reached the first room of him. Nico rose. He did not look frightened anymore. Blood ran from both ears. His hands conducted the air, 3 short, 1 long, and his mouth opened with the hymn inside it, not singing along, singing as source. The others heard it too. Marta whispered his name. Tomas tried to reach him. Nico turned toward the open lines and sang, "Battalion, here." I hit him. There is no gentler way to write it. I struck a boy half my age across the mouth with the back of my hand and knocked him into the bench. The cord broke for one blessed instant. Father Odran drove the plunger down. The ossuary wall exploded inward. The charge did not destroy Enoch at once. It opened the crypt. Bone, brick, and chalk dust filled the chamber. The lamps went out. Something heavy struck my shoulder and spun me to the floor. For several seconds there was only impact, darkness, and the sensation of the world squeezing my head between 2 iron plates. Then I realized sound had not vanished. It had become total. The hymn came through the broken wall naked of wire. I crawled blind over shattered wax and wet boards. My right ear heard nothing but a high whine. My left heard too much. Somewhere Marta was coughing. Thomas called roll because Thomas would call roll in the mouth of perdition. Severin answered in Latin. Nico laughed softly, then sobbed. Father Odran prayed. Each word dragged uphill. A cold light grew in the ossuary breach. It was not flame. It was the color of moonlight seen through drowned skin. In that light, the old burial shelves had collapsed, revealing a narrow service tunnel beyond the chapel foundation. It must have been an older drain or priest's passage, long sealed, running toward the enemy side. Through it came the wire stump of 7, blackened and taut, braided with roots and pale hair. The cable pulsed. At the far end of the broken passage, something sang. I did not see it clearly at first. My eyes watered and refused focus. Then the melody shifted, and with it the shadows arranged themselves into an image. A head rested in a cage of black iron. It might have been 30 yards away. It might have been 300 and drawn close by the song. Its skin had the gray-yellow tightness of old tallow. Its eyes were open and filmed white. Around the severed neck, cold blood had frozen and thawed and frozen again in black ropes. As it sang, the blood moved, forming symbols on the stone beneath the cage, each mark appearing in rhythm. 3 strokes, 1 bar, curl, hook, void. The mouth should not have worked without lungs. It worked. The jaw opened with patient joy. Behind it, in the cold light, I saw the suggestion of an altar. Black stone, 9 candle niches, a body kneeling without a head, hands folded around the blade that had finished the offering. Heretic figures stood in robes stiff with old blood, but whether they were present or only shown by the hymn I cannot say. The chorister sang, and our room answered, not with instruments, with us. Thomas's mouth moved first. He clamped both hands over it, but the sound came through his nose in a strained hum. Severin pressed his forehead to the floor and bit his sleeve. Marta took her knife and cut the web of skin between thumb and finger, using pain as a tuning fork for herself. Nico simply sat up, face shining with tears, and sang as beautifully as any church boy. I felt the hymn searching my chest for the note that would make me useful. It found memories instead. My father teaching me to splice fishing line, my mother rinsing copper pots. The Maronite sergeant saying every fault tells the truth if you listen properly. Myself laughing at Father Odrin's warnings, myself lifting the receiver of a dead telephone because a bell had rung. The hymn arranged these things into accusation, then invitation. You are a repairman, it told me without words. Here is the broken circuit. Complete it. The open lines sparked on the ruined board. Battalion, artillery, engineers, reserve aid. They waited like mouths. I crawled toward the board with the axe. My limbs had become distant possessions. Each movement required bargaining. The hymn promised rest if I lay down. It promised understanding if I listened. It promised that all war was only unresolved harmony, all trenches staves, all men notes waiting for direction. I believed it for half a heartbeat. That is the worst I can confess. Not that I was overpowered, but that despair seemed reasonable. Father Odran reached me. Blood ran from his nose into his mouth. He pushed something into my hand. Blessed wax, the last of it, warmed soft from his palm. "Ears," he mouthed. "I can still hear through bone," I shouted, though I could not tell if sound left me. He shook his head and pointed, not to my ears, but to the board. I understood. Wax was insulation. I packed the blessed wax into the open jacks one by one. It smoked where it touched brass. The hymn snarled, not a metaphor. The melody grew teeth. Nico lunged at me, still singing, and Marta caught him around the waist. Thomas, with blackened hands, held the cords away while I jammed wax into line 2. Severin smashed insulators with the wrench, chanting numbers now instead of psalms. Resistance, gauge, length, voltage, the holy liturgy of matter. Line 2 died. Then artillery, then engineers. The chorister's eyes turned toward me. Across the broken passage, the head sang my name. Ivo Marek, son of wire and water. I kept working. Ivo, who thinks cause is mercy. I jammed wax into the reserve aid jack. Ivo, who answered first. The dead spare telephone rang inside the tool chest under its brick. 3 short, 1 long. The brick lifted, fell, lifted again. The chest lid cracked. From within came my own voice, patient and professional. Enoch receiving. Identify. The chorister answered through Nico's mouth. I am the line. The board burst. Black fluid sprayed from the split wood, colder than winter, striking my face and hands. Where it touched, skin went numb. Symbols formed on my sleeves and crawled inward, trying to arrange my arms into conducting gestures. I dropped the axe. Tomas fell across the board, using his body to smother the cords. The hymn went through him, his back arched, his mouth opened. He sang one perfect note and died. I do not know if his heart stopped from shock, cold, or mercy. I know only that his note held the cord aside long enough for Father Odran to rise. The priest took the cracked crucifix in both hands and walked toward the breach. He should not have been able to stand. None of us should. But there are forms of obedience older than fear. He stepped over bones, wires, and splintered planks while the chorister sang his mother's voice, then his own voice, then the voices of men he had failed to save. At the edge of the broken passage, he turned back to me. "Cut the earth," he said. I could not hear the words, but I saw them. The main earth braid ran from the board to the chapel foundation, then through the ossuary recess to the buried cable path. I had made it myself, proud of its neatness. I crawled to it and found the axe by touch. My hands were clumsy, half frozen. The braid pulsed under my palm like an artery. The chorister's song rose. Nico shrieked. Marta cursed. Severin laughed once, a broken sound, as he realized what I was about to do. I swung. Copper does not cut easily when braided thick. The first blow flattened strands, the second bit halfway. The third sent pain up my arm so sharp I thought the axe had turned. The braid bled black at the cut. Cold blood ran over the floor, making measures, trying to finish the sign. Father Odran threw himself onto the forming mark. His body broke its shape. I swung again. The earth braid parted. All sound vanished. Not quiet. Quiet is a kind of sound. This was absence, enormous and white. My mouth opened, perhaps to scream, but nothing returned to me. The cold light snapped out. The pressure lifted. In the same instant, the roof beam above the ossuary recess gave way, and the passage collapsed in a roar I felt through my bones but did not hear. Stone, earth, and bones buried the chorister's line. Darkness took the rest. They dug us out before dawn. I learned this later from Marta, writing left-handed on a slate because I could not hear and she could barely speak. The engineers found the chapel crawl, half-collapsed, the guard dead at his post with both hands pressed to his ears, and Enoch buried to the height of the switchboard. They expected corpses. They found 4 living and 2 dead. Thomas lay across the ruined board. Father Odran lay near the ossuary breach, one arm under fallen stone, his hand still pressed over a black mark on the floor. Neither breathed. The priest's face, Marta wrote, looked peaceful only if one had never seen peace. Nico lived, though no one thanked God for it at first. He had bitten through his lower lip and torn 2 fingernails out against the bench. When they pulled him free, he was humming without sound, his throat moving in the rhythm. They gagged him for the carryback. He wept when he understood why. Severin lived with both hands frost-burned and a strip of copper embedded in his forearm. For 3 days he spoke only measurements. On the 4th he asked for confession. On the 5th he forgot how to solder, which frightened him more than hell. Marta's bad eye went entirely white. Her good one remained sharp. She kept the logbooks under her coat during the rescue and refused morphia until she had handed them to an officer with instructions to keep them closed unless a chaplain stood present. I loved her for that. In the clean way soldiers love anyone who preserves sense after madness. As for me, the surgeons said both eardrums had ruptured. The right ear was gone beyond field repair. The left retained pressure and pain but no useful hearing. They removed blackened fragments from my cheek and hands. One symbol had marked itself across the inside of my wrist. Father Odran's successor burned it out with a silver nitrate stick while I watched smoke curl from my own skin in perfect time with a rhythm I could no longer hear. Command called Enoch a success. I saw the report, not the full one perhaps, but enough. It said, "Listening post. Enoch provided actionable intelligence leading to destruction of enemy artillery, prevention of gas casualties, discovery of mine gallery, and repulse of major heretic assault. Post lost to enemy anomalous countersignal. Casualties acceptable in view of operational effect. Acceptable." Thomas Arendt, who had kept straight lines until a crooked song broke him, became acceptable. Father Odran Kiel, who had understood before any of us and still crawled into the dark, became acceptable. Nico's ruined mouth, Severin's hands, Marta's eye, my silence, all acceptable. The line had held, the assault had failed. Men who never entered Enoch marked the ledger in our favor. I do not deny the numbers. This is what makes judgment hard. Those guns were destroyed. The gas warning saved men. The mine was stopped. The dawn assault broke. Had we abandoned Enoch on the first night, hundreds more might have died. Perhaps thousands, if the line opened. Command was not wrong in the way fools are wrong. It was wrong in the way hungry men are wrong when they eat from a poisoned pot because the first spoonful warms them. The hospital lay 6 miles behind the front in a convent whose sisters had been evacuated and whose walls still smelled faintly of lavender under carbolic. They put me in a ward for head wounds and blast deafness. Communication became chalk, slate, gesture, and facial patience. Some men shouted at me, forgetting volume did not build bridges over absence. Others avoided speaking at all, as if deafness were contagious. Marta visited once before being sent to a rear ophthalmic hospital. She wrote slowly because her hand shook. Nico sent back to signals observation, not front post, rear exchange. I stared at the slate until she took it away. "He should not be near wires," I said, or thought I said. My voice sounded inside me like a boot in snow. She read my lips and nodded. Then she wrote, "I told them." Below it, after a pause, "They need experienced men." I laughed then. No sound came to me. It hurt my chest anyway. Severin visited after her, bandaged to the elbows. He carried Father Odran's cracked crucifix wrapped in cloth. He had been asked to repair it. He said, by slate, that he could not. The brass would not take solder. Every join opened after cooling. "We are not to speak of chorister network," he wrote. "Official term is counter-signal contamination." I took the chalk from him and wrote, "Did they burn the passage?" He hesitated. "Sealed. Burned." He closed his eyes. "Sealed. There are words that tell you everything by what they refuse to be." The ward nights were worst. Daylight kept men busy with dressings, broth, inspections, letters. At night the lamps lowered, the orderlies softened their steps, and pain found room to speak. I could not hear the groans, which should have been mercy. Instead, I felt vibrations through the bed frame. Coughs, wheels, distant guns, the thud of doors, the pulse of my own blood. My mind, robbed of sound, manufactured echoes. Static rhythm, disconnected bells, a wire tightening in my hands like a throat. On the 7th night after Enoch, I woke before dawn with my left palm pressed against the iron bed rail. Something was tapping through it. Not loud, not heard, felt. 3 short, 1 long. I sat up so quickly the room tilted. Across the ward, 2 beds down, a man with bandaged ears moved his fingers against his blanket. 3 short, 1 long. Beyond him, another patient's jaw worked in sleep. At the far end, near the stove, an orderly paused while folding sheets and tapped the rhythm once on the linen shelf before catching himself. I told myself it was memory, trauma, suggestion. Men from the same front carrying the same nervous habits. A practical explanation is a lantern, and I reached for it like any frightened man. Then the patient in the next bed began to hum. He was a signals lance corporal from another sector. I knew this from the blue piping on his torn sleeve. He had never been in Enoch. His head was wrapped in gauze, his eyes were closed. The hum was faint enough that I did not hear it, but I saw it in his throat and felt it in the bed rail. A nurse crossed herself. The man's mouth shaped a word. I leaned closer, though leaning closer had been my first sin and remained my trade. The word was not Larch, nor Thomas, nor Evo. It was a map coordinate. By morning, 3 orderlies, 2 wounded signalmen, and a cook from the convalescent kitchen had tapped the same rhythm. The ward physician called it nervous imitation. The chaplain ordered prayer. A staff captain came with a notebook and asked whether the coordinate had been written down accurately. I watched his pencil move and wanted to break his hand. Instead, I took the slate and wrote 1 sentence for him. Do not listen. He read it, frowned, and asked the nurse whether Corporal Marrick's hearing loss included confusion. That afternoon, guns opened far to the north. I felt them through the hospital floor long before anyone looked toward the windows. Later, a rumor came with the soup. An enemy ammunition store had been struck after a chance intelligence report from a wounded man in our ward. Good fortune, the orderly said. Providence, said another. Across the room, the signals lance corporal smiled in his sleep. His fingers moved beneath the blanket. 3 short, 1 long. I have written this account because paper is slower than sound. Ink cannot ring by itself, or so I pray. If you are hearing these words read aloud, then someone has already judged them safe enough to carry out of the dark, which may be another kind of folly. Still, warnings must travel somehow. Silence can hide infection as easily as it can starve it. Understand this. The danger was not only that a heretic chorister sang through a field telephone. That would be a terror, but a simple one. The greater danger was that it told the truth. Not always, perhaps, not kindly, never freely, but enough. It knew that men at war will bargain with corruption if corruption arrives bearing coordinates. It knew command would weigh souls against batteries and call the arithmetic necessity. It knew operators are trained to answer bells, record signals, restore broken lines, and keep listening until relieved. It knew me. I have spent many nights asking when I should have stopped. When Drop 7 fell, though Larch was dead. When the spare telephone rang. When the first warning proved true. When it spoke Thomas's mother's name. The mind seeks a clean switch in memory, one lever that should have been thrown. But damnation in war seldom enters by a door marked so plainly. It comes as a useful thing under pressure. It comes as one more unpleasant tool. It comes with men's lives attached to the other side of the choice. If I had refused to listen after the first night, those Western guns might have opened on our sleeping trench. If Thomas had burned the cylinders, the gas warning might never have gone. If Father Odran had dragged us out and sealed the chapel, the mine under the bell crater might have taken half a company with it. I know this. I carry those saved lives beside the lost ones, and the balance never settles. But I also know the hymn did not end in Enoch. No report will say so. Reports prefer contained incidents. They like destroyed equipment, sealed passages, acceptable casualties, recommendations for improved chaplain oversight and insulation protocols. They do not know what to do with a tune passed from bed rail to finger, from finger to pencil, from pencil to gun order, from gun order to praise. They do not know what to do with success that hums. Nico came to see me once more before they moved him. His mouth had healed badly, leaving a white line down the lip. He brought no slate. He stood at the foot of my bed and looked smaller than he had in Enoch. For a while he only held his cap. Then he tapped on the bed frame. Not the hymn. Line clear. Old signal code. 2 taps. Pause. 1 tap. Are you there? I answered with my knuckles. 1 tap. Here. His face crumpled. He nodded, wiped his eyes furiously, and left before either of us could discover whether Mercy still had a sound. I wanted that to be the end of him in this account. It would be kinder. But 2 weeks later, a rear exchange intercepted an enemy movement through damaged lines before any aerial report. The warning saved a convoy. The operator credited was Private Nico Salan. The note beside his name read, "Exceptional auditory intuition. Exceptional. Useful. Acceptable." Severin wrote to me from a monastery hospital. His handwriting had changed, larger and less precise. He said he could no longer bear bells. The brothers had removed the refectory chime for his sake. At prayer, if the chant held a certain interval, his hands bled along old copper scars. He believed Father Odran's soul was at peace. He did not say he believed the chorister was destroyed. Marta sent one message from the rear. "If you hear nothing, trust that." It was the closest thing to comfort anyone gave me. I do not hear the hymn now. That is my blessing and my punishment. I feel it sometimes, through tables, rails, the handles of tools. Perhaps that is memory. Perhaps bone remembers what ears cannot. When rain strikes the hospital roof in an uneven pattern, men look up and smile without knowing why. When a disconnected telephone is carried past on a repair cart, I watch its bell cups until it leaves the room. When staff officers lower their voices near my bed, I read enough on their lips to know new listening posts are being dug with improved safeguards. Improved safeguards. God forgive us, we learn so well. If you serve in signals, remember that not every message desires delivery. If a deadline calls, do not answer out of habit. If static arranges itself into rhythm, break rhythm before meaning arrives. If a warning saves you, ask what it has purchased with your gratitude. If a wire vibrates like a throat beneath your hand, cut it first and justify yourself later. No intelligence is worth becoming the mouth by which hell learns to speak clearly. And if you are in a hospital ward behind the lines, among men with bandaged heads and distant eyes, listen with your sight when night comes. Watch their fingers. Watch the rails of the beds. Watch the pencils of staff captains who stand too eagerly near sleeping mouths. Should you see 3 short taps and 1 long, wake the chaplain. Do not wake the operator. Do not write down the coordinate. Above all, do not hum along.